Okay, let's get started. We have two new readers today. It's going to be a wonderful afternoon event. Welcome to Susan Platt and Dr. Bob Casey. And we'll get started. I've warned Bob and Susan about the poem. I said, don't be surprised if I stop and have the audience say a poem. I say a line, you say a line. Right, right, right,
Right.
until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud,
Then read aloud.
you'll draw a crowd
You'll draw a crowd.
and bring us great delight.
Bring us
Oh.
great delight.
And delight is the word of the poem that I just love.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. I want to make sure that we acknowledge all of those who have gone before us, especially the Duwamish tribe, upon whose land we stand. And I'm glad we're saying that more and more frequently here at Horizon House. My name is Nancy Cope, and welcome to Susan and Bob Casey. I want to be sure you know about the three-ringed binder. It is volume 2, I might add, of a 2-volume set. And it is some of the writing that we've heard since 2017. It's an amazing collection of writing. So I can't even hold it open and show you the names, but someday I'll read all the names to you. We started in 2017, so you can imagine how many people have read their writing. Okay, here we go, Bob. Are you ready?
Sure.
First of all, how many, I'm going to use the words from his book, so be ready. How many of you have been to Southeast Utah Canyon Country? Oh, good. Oh, good. Excellent. Secondly, how many of you have been to Northeastern Indian Country? What's that, Bob?
Northeast of, you're talking about the Four Corners now.
Yes.
Yeah,
That would be New Mexico.
No, well.
No?
Yeah, no. It would, the Northeast would be Utah.
There we go, Utah. Okay, how many of you have been to Rocky Mountain Frontier Country? That's Colorado. Okay, there we go.
Southwest Colorado.
Okay, and then the last place is how many of you have been to the Spanish Rio Grande Country? And that's New Mexico, isn't it?
Good.
This book, the title is Journey to the High Southwest, a Traveler's Guide. So Bob and I met last week for the first time, and he and I talked for a while, and I said, may I take this book home and familiarize myself with it, thinking I could skim it. It is not a book to skim. I had the best times getting stopped on page number 1. In fact, you're reading some of the introduction, aren't you, Bob?
Right.
The introduction is so interesting. It's a page turner. And I'm so amazed by what this book includes. The geology, the sketches that your sister-in-law did. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Don't miss the sketches. It's just an amazing book, and it makes me want to get, well, I don't have a car anymore, so I can't get in my car, go drive.
Okay.
But it just is a wonderful book. I hope you get it from our back shelf. It'll be on the back shelf of our collection of books by us and about us. Okay, Bob, I'm going to, before I turn the mic over to you, I found out something about Bob Casey that I think is pretty darn important. In the 1970s, he was involved in getting the Seattle Indian Health Board started. And it's still existing and going full force, providing services very, very deep in this community.
Oh, yeah. When we set this up, a mental health clinic for the Seattle Indian Health Board, the idea was to take care of the literally thousands of Native Americans who had been dumped into large cities to give them bigger opportunities. However, there was nobody there to take care of them, their health at all. So SIHB was set up, and then another friend of mine, comrade, started in 1976 to put a mental health clinic there. And I was one of the founders, but then I stayed there for 10 years as a once a week, half-day consultant. But we had some wonderful people to work with. It was a great time.
Oh,
Yeah.
Bob, I have to say, I urge you to come back for another writer's read or another evening program, because this is an amazing part of your life. And
Yep.
the book is an amazing part of your life, but this is also an amazing part of your life. So I cheer you on. Let's maybe give him a round of applause for that work that he did in the 70s. Thank you, Bob. So it's all yours, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you. My first trip to New Mexico. This is the foreword that I have in my book, the introduction to the book. During several summers in the late 1940s, near the end of July, when the Oklahoma sun had heated the asphalt to the point you could almost fry an egg on it, and when even the largest of fans would not cool our bedrooms at night, we would pack the car and head for the high country in New Mexico. Sometimes on our way to Santa Fe or Taos, we went by U.S. Highway 66, while at other times we headed west through the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles to Raton, New Mexico. Well, it was always the same. Early in the morning, with the car windows rolled down as far as they would go, we began the long daytime hot drive through the flat prairie, the superheated wind parching us to the bone. Occasionally the monotony was broken either by a mirage, it looked like water standing on the road, or by a single giant cloud casting a refreshing shadow for a few miles. But the U.S. Highway 66, the Mother Road, as John Steinbeck dubbed it, was even more enlivening the further west we went. We got to New Mexico. There were large yellow signs warning, "Dangerous dip ahead," as the road turned into a roller coaster nightmare for those of us with queasy stomachs in the back seat. Even the roadside billboards offered a relief from this boredom, as red and white Burma shave signs, spaced widely apart, gave us fits of laughter. "Don't stick your elbow out so far. It may go home in another car." But on the first national highway going west, we slowly reached 5,000 feet elevation by late afternoon, where it was hot, but not unbearably so. The high, dry country had finally wrung the last miserable bit of humidity out of the air. Just as the sun was beginning to set, the road began to climb noticeably, and we found ourselves in country altogether different from where we were in the morning. Now we were in the high desert, surrounded by lofty mountain peaks looming in the distance. Immediately we flatlanders would try to spot patches of snow on the distant peaks, sometimes mistaking in our eagerness billowy white clouds for the real McCoy. The next thing we noticed was the sky. In the high, dry, clear air, it seemed bluer and brighter than we'd ever known it, and it spread across the country with such immensity that it did not even look like the sky we had at home. On that horizon, that azure blue sky dipped down to the earth, where it seemed to mingle with an infinite variety of multicolored land forms, poking their tips right into its blue borders. As the road topped one ridge after the other, it seemed that we could see forever from those lofty viewpoints. There was a sense of boundless space and openness that was different from anything we had known. Later, when the sun made its magnificent exit behind the distant mountains, the air suddenly chilled. For a few moments, exhilarated by that drop in temperature, we just gulped great deep breaths of that cool, high, dry air, often pungent with the aroma of pinon pine and sage. There in the deepening twilight and incredible silence of that big country, we knew we had reached the high Southwest. I'm not sure whether my love affair with the high Southwest described above began then at age 10 or whether it was earlier. For one day, about a year before that first trip to New Mexico, I had discovered, carefully wrapped and boxed in the attic of our home, a black pot that my parents had purchased in the late 1920s at one of the Rio Grande, New Mexico pueblos, north of Santa Fe. I recall being fascinated by the utter smoothness of that vessel's black, shiny surface. Over and over, my fingers traced the beautifully executed serpent design that encircled it. Somehow, I guess, trying to discover its meaning. I could not imagine how an object of such rare beauty was fashioned by hand from raw clay. So on that first trip to New Mexico, my parents took us to a pueblo to see how that black pot I found in the attic was made. On arriving there, my dad took me to see several pueblo women hand building and decorating fine and thin pots and firing them in open bonfires, just as their ancestors did, my father told me, nearly 1,000 years before. Other sights and experiences in New Mexico that summer also left indelible impressions on my memory. One in particular stands out. I learned that the oldest continually occupied public building in the United States was the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe, not back east, not in Florida. That surprising discovery fully awakened Tom. From that day on, I never again fully trusted American history books to tell it the way it was. Later, my pessimism seemed fully justified when I learned that the two oldest continually occupied villages or towns in the United States were not along the Atlantic seaboard, as I'd been led to believe, but were instead atop two high mesas, one on the Hopi Reservation, Old Oribi, in northeastern Arizona, and the other, Acoma Pueblo, in northwestern New Mexico. When I was 19 years old, I journeyed with a college buddy west of Santa Fe for the first time to the Four Corners region. The name Four Corners was originally meant to signify a map maker's delight, where in just one location in the United States, just one, the corners of four states, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah, come together on the Colorado Plateau. If this is hard to realize, just think of the governors of the four states sitting down to lunch together once a year around a dining table centered on the exact spot of that coalescence of states, with each governor sitting in a chair in his own state. Over time, the Four Corners became not just the moniker for where four states meet up, but the whole Colorado Plateau as well. It is a vast 5,000-foot high elevation, tableland, a high desert, surrounded by some of the region's highest mountains, some 13ers, as they say about those high mountains in the Rockies, stretching 400 miles from north to south and 500 miles east to west. That contains wondrous scenery and hiking opportunities with 9 national parks and 12 national monuments. Some have said this sparsely populated populated rock empire was a symphony in sandstone, with its colorful, whimsical pillars and intricately carved hoodoos of fairy chimneys, as well as a dazzling array of mesas, buttes, and more canyons, most record breakers than you can count. Found no other place in America, not even in any other part of the Southwest, right there in the Four Corners. With ample land to roam and a sparse population, many enjoy the Four Corners solitude as well as the beauty. Some say it's the land of room enough and time enough. Ready to go? Okay. Now we're going to travel. Well, we drove into Moab last night. Moab, Utah. Got a good sleep, but we feel a little anxious this morning. No wonder. We've avoided doing this for years. At Moab each year, as we crossed and recrossed the bridge across the Colorado River, flowing into Utah from its Colorado source 300 miles away, we passed numerous signs advertising Colorado river trips. We discussed the possibility of such a trip last year, but quickly dismissed it. Somehow rafting the Colorado always seemed connected with high adventure, not too suitable for a family with young kids. But over time, we came to know numerous ecstatic survivors of raft trips who extolled their safety as well as their fun, pleasure, and scenic beauty. So yesterday, we caved, and we took the plunge, making reservations for all 4 of us for today's oar-powered raft trip. The bus arrives on time. We climb aboard it. About half a dozen of these other hardy souls and several well-tanned raft guides who inspire confidence just by their weathered appearance, looking for all the world like veteran Huck Finns. The bus takes us up the Colorado River Gorge, passing below the high rim of Arches National Park, which was the inspiration for Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire. Soon the gorge opens into wider, picturesque valleys. We are told that many of these have served as backdrops for a variety of Western movies. At the launching site, we exit the bus and explore, while our erstwhile river pilots prepare for the launching of the 2 large nylon and neoprene rafts with their many individually inflated chambers. The river rocks are fascinating. We ask about several and discover that our guides are well-educated natural historians. One particularly beautiful whitish rock with many parallel cross striations is identified as a piece of oil shale, rounded and smoothed by the river's powerful grinding and cutting action. Our son finds several beached channel catfish that had given up the ghost in the silty water. The water is so thick with silt and debris today that it looks like gruel. It is almost surprising that it's wet. Our oarsman tries to beat me, and he jokes, "Well, it's too thick to drink, but too thin to plow." We're told that yesterday's big thunderstorm, the first in many weeks, has washed all kinds of matter into the river. The boats are ready. We were given life jackets and safety instructions before we board. Now that we are comfortably seated in the raft, our guide rows us skillfully into the main channel. He points out a variety of rock formations, including the Titan, a 900-foot sandstone spire that stands up 300 feet taller than the Washington Monument. In a few miles, we meet the first rapids that slowly build up to the liveliest run on the trip, the White Rapids. We hold on tight as the raft picks up speed, bouncing us up and down. The front of the raft is elevated now as we plunge through the rapids, Colorado River soup thoroughly spraying us. In the churning waters, there are small tree branches, medium-sized burls of wood, detached juniper roots, pine cones, grass, and numerous small plants washed down from their native environments many miles away. Yesterday's storm must have cleared out every gully, wash, arroyo, and canyon for miles around. Our son spots a snarled, twisted stick of wood in calmer waters. So I reach over the side of the raft and grab it. Success! It is a beautiful tree root, smoothed to an exquisite fineness by the abrasive action of river and rocks. I place it on the floor of the raft, preparing for the next series of rapids. Well, they're less intense and are followed by a wide, calm section of river where we pull ashore for lunch. After exploring the shorelines and devouring a tasty lunch, we once again head for the main channel. The water is very still now, and the guide is forced to row. The sun is directly overhead, and we are grateful for our protective clothing. Soon we pull over to a wide, sandy beach where we see the bus waiting for us. We climb aboard our vintage bus and arrive back here at Moab about 4:30 p.m. Confident that we can survive the moderate rapids above Moab, we are tempted to try a more difficult stretch of river the next time. Well, perhaps we'll try Cataract Canyon. No way, my wife says. So we'll see. Okay, now we're going down to Arizona, and we're going to one of the rarest spots. It's 3 p.m., and we have just arrived at the Hopi Cultural Center to check on the time for today's snake dance at Shongopovi Village. We are told that we should get on over there before it gets too crowded. Just a short drive there. We luckily find a parking place nearby. We enter the village, along with many, many others. We have been told that the village streets and the plaza become the stage, and the rooftops of the homes facing the plaza are the grandstands. Sure enough, there are many rooftop onlookers, as well as 2 golden eagles holding vigil, tethered up there, standing quietly in a prime location where they can see all of the activity below. We look for some place to watch this special religious dance when a Hopi woman invites us to stand next to her in a shady spot, commenting that she wants to be sure that our 9-year-old son can see the dance. Then she said she hoped the dance, which is known for bringing rain, goes well. We really need it. Well, the shade was welcome, since the hot sun on a clear blue day like that, there was no breeze. It would scorch us. From our great vantage point, we quickly spot the tall ladder protruding from the air, protruding into the air from the opening of the underground kiva, a revered ceremonial chamber underground, and a dance prep room. Very soon, the noisy, excited crowd hushes as the dancers enter the plaza. In their otherworldly full regalia, the dancers, with their graceful, perfectly synchronized movements, give us hint that after this afternoon's viewing may very well surpass the drama we saw last week at the Santa Fe Opera. In their out-of-the-ordinary dress, their feet directed at the center of the earth pound the plaza's firm but dusty surface with staccato-like cadence as they dance in tight lines close up, coiling through the plaza like serpents, their rhythm-haunting utterances muffled into otherworldly sounds by their larger-than-life animal masks as they chant their way through the plaza. Boom, 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 pounds the deerskin-covered drum. Ch-ch-ch, 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 say the gourds as they rattle in perfect unison. The turtle shells clap as feet hit the ground. These complex, 1,000-year-old rhythms, unknown to us, fix our attention, mesmerizing us to the point I feel goosebumps at the back of my neck. Our Hopi hosts around us also seem transfixed with this spiritual primal scene, even though they've probably experienced it many times before, and most likely even played parts in it. We're told that two Hopi clans, Antelope Society and Snake Society, are participating with more than 50 dancers. The snake dancers live up to their name, revealing their unbelievable relationship to live snakes, both poisonous and non-poisonous. The snakes are placed in the dancers' mouths, whose teeth press against the snake's midsection, just below their heads, leaving the snakes dangling in midair, writhing in space, baring their fangs, turning their heads back and forth perilously close to the dancers' faces. But each dancer has a well-trained accomplice alongside him, who with great patience keeps his head bent down, intently watching every move of the snake's mouth, knowledgeably deploying his over a foot long wand, a powerful eagle feather, to divert the snake and its fangs from the dancers' faces. As the snake dancers move in front of us, the audience is quiet, if not reverent. We and all the other fair-skinned guests, known as Pahanas in Hopi land, are seeing a harmony between man and nature we have probably never thought possible. We gaze with great concentration as the drama of snake and man in such close contact unfolds. We forget the scorching heat, and forget that we failed to bring our sunglasses. We are transfixed, as are our Hopi neighbors. No carnival atmosphere here. This is the holiest of the holy. During a short break, midway through the ceremony, the focus changes to the Hopi clowns. In the Hopi world, there is a place in their pantheon for spirits, clowns, who are carefree, sometimes raucous, even boisterous antics and buffoonery are sprinkled with laughter and fun. The clowns enter the plaza from most surprising places. When the crowd sees them, they yell and shout as the clowns start throwing to the audience gifts of food, toys, candy, water, bread. There is more laughter as everybody reaches out for these much-loved treats from their white and black striped clowns, zany jokers who are loved by all. As the dance concludes, a shadow passes over the plaza. Splat, splat, splat. I look down and see large, elongated raindrops hitting the ground. Now the wind comes as more raindrops fall. Meanwhile, the young snake clan dancers are sanctified with cornmeal. Then they dart off to gather up dozens of snakes from the ground and run pell-mell out of the plaza to the mesa's edge, where they gently release the snakes to the four directions and to their cliffside seeps and springs that are their homes. The diligent efforts to bring moisture have succeeded. It's pouring now. We run for our car. An unforgettable day, our daughter shouts as we run. I'll never forget this day. Now, to Capitol Reef National Park, which I have to say is our favorite national park out of the many down there. And so we it's 9 a.m. We arrive at the parking area for the Pleasant Creek hike at a perennially flowing stream in Capitol Reef. The stream has its origin up along the escarpments of the Aquarius Plateau's Boulder Mountain. There, at elevation several thousand feet higher than here, the rainfall is more plentiful, enough so to keep Pleasant Creek flowing year-round, allowing it over the millennia to carve this beautiful wide valley. We douse ourselves with insect repellent and sunscreen, and with several bottles of water in our day pack, head down the creek. There's not a maintained trail here, but intrepid travelers' boots have worn a pathway through the brush. Now we leave the stream and walk across the valley floor to the colorful high cliffs on the northeast side. We reach the black boulder-strewn talus slopes below the cliffs and spread out as we search the cliff walls for some of the most unusual petroglyphs in southeastern Utah. Our daughter yells out first. Sure enough, she's standing in front of one of the largest petroglyph panels. We climb the jumbled heaps of rocks to get a closer look. In one area, we see several figures that look like smiley faces. Now we see a number of concentric circles resembling a target with a bullseye. We have been told that many of these pictures may have been made by ancient native star-gazing and tracking cults thought to record the data of the heavens. Even today, the events in the heavens determine the time of day for planting and certain ceremonial functions for many of the regional tribes. Perhaps the mouth in the smiley figure is a crescent moon, and the pecked holes above it may be two stars or planets, as they appeared in relation to the moon some starry night, maybe we reckon 1,000 years ago. The concentric circles baffle us, but we do remember reading that they may represent the sun. Our son notices some interesting animal and oversized human forms on another petroglyph panel. We marvel at the ability of these very early people to incise the rock so precisely with little more than a piece of chert or flint that has been worked into the shape of a chisel. Looking at our watches, we carefully descend the talus slopes to the creek to explore the valley further downstream. We walk through sage, tamarisk, and willow. Monarch butterflies flit nonchalantly in the purple tamarisk blossoms. One monarch, completely absorbed with the blossoms, catches my daughter's eye. She sneaks up behind it and is able to photograph it from less than 2 feet away. Now the valley's high southern wall and the creek come close together as we enter Pleasant Creek Canyon. Soon the very high canyon walls narrow and block the sun. The shade is refreshing. Soon we reach an area where the creek narrows and the water flows down sandstone steps that gently drop a few feet at a time until the water finally cascades into several large, possibly deep pools before meandering on as Pleasant Creek. Okay, it's 11 a.m., warm and getting warmer. We are sweating profusely. The pools look inviting. The cold water feels good as we immerse ourselves, being instantly refreshed by the water. As the kids wade upstream, we dry off by stretching out on a huge slab of sandstone. The warm rock feels good on our cold, wet bodies as the hot sun now beams down on us. Again, in the colorful butterflies flit from one side of the creek to the other. We relax completely. Scanning the horizon, we notice several massive, high, white dome-shaped rock formations. They call them Capitol domes, looming in the distance against a backdrop of an absolutely clear blue sky. With no other people around, we have this valley to ourselves this June day. We savor these moments of total solitude deep in the remote canyon recesses of Pleasant Creek Canyon Reef National Park. Ready to go. Okay. Sit. Go. Good? Yeah, good. Thank you.
I was going to read, I won't, the Tony Hillerman. How many have read a Tony Hillerman book? He writes about Bob's book on the cover, and so you'll have to check that out. Bob, thank you so much. You'll
Well,
have to
you're
come
welcome.
back to a writer's read at least, if not
Okay.
a series of programs.
All
Thank
right.
you. This was a real treat.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, Susan, as you know, or might not know, is an art historian, but she has expanded that field with A, a number of books, and B, an amazing intellect about how art frequently is associated with a political statement. And so we have those two worlds to deal with Susan. And she's going to help us understand that whole field, which, Susan, has it become kind of a new field of?
Well, when I started working in this area, it was absolutely forbidden.
Oh,
yeah.
forbidden.
Yeah, it was forbidden for artists to have any political content. And
Look at that. What year was that?
well, I got my blog site in 2007, but it was a little before that artists started sneaking it in.
Okay.
But usually metaphorically, obscurely, you couldn't tell what it was.
Here we
Am I
go
doing something
with
wrong?
another adjustment. I just want to say that I think it's her second book is titled Art and Politics in the 1930s. These books of Susan Platt's are in the library on the windowsill, and of course they have her name, Platt. P stands for Platt. That's how we book those books in the back there. So I brought this one, Setting Our Hearts on Fire. This is your last book. You're working on a new book.
Yes, right.
So she's going to help us understand this amazing field. Thank you for coming to Writers Read, Susan.
Thank you, Nancy.
Just look forward to this.
Okay. Did you want me to say something about how I switched into
It's
art and
right.
politics?
Yes, I would love your story.
Okay. So I started out as a very well-behaved art historian where we didn't talk about politics. This book is called Modernism in the 1920s, and it's about as far away from politics as you can get, because I was not even looking at art. I was looking at critics of art. So there isn't a single picture in this book. And this was my dissertation. And then I got a grant to go and do research on modernism in the 1930s. Boy, was I clever. But I immediately ran into politics in the 1930s. So I wrote this book, Art and Politics in the 1930s. And then I got deeper into it, and I began to write a lot of articles in magazines and newspapers, and left academia. So I was free to really plunge into this idea, and now I feel it's absolutely urgent that artists are a valuable creative force in our society that can address our major issues right now. So I have these two books, Art and Politics Now and Setting Our Hearts on Fire, and then I'm working on something right now called Around the World in 25 Years. So that's my writing about art in other parts of the world. Okay, so you see, I have three artists that I'm going to focus on today. And I want to mention before, let's see if I can make this work. Is this the thing? Oh, here it is. Let's see. Is this the advance? Yeah. Before I start reading, I want to call attention to this supremely important exhibition that's coming to the Seattle Art Museum at the end of this month. Jean Quick-to-See Smith. I have a couple of articles on her, and I'm actually writing one at the moment. She's absolutely fascinating. So I urge you all to go to this show. That's my little pitch for Jean. So I'm going to start with Carletta Carrington Wilson, who lives in Seattle, and I hope to have her come as part of our art program at some point. So I reviewed 2 exhibitions by Carletta. I've never done something where I'm reading my own book and looking at slides. Usually I run around in front of the audience pointing at things, so it's going to be hard to keep me in my seat, but I'll try. Okay, Carletta Carrington Wilson's Book of the Bound and Letter to a Laundress. The Northwest African American Museum has opened a new gallery with an intimate scale for this special exhibition, Book of the Bound. Carrington Wilson is a poet and spoken word performer as well as a visual artist. In this exhibition, she has given us 22 books, many of them bound shut, with ornate covers of many materials: lace, newspaper, bone, fabrics, string, jewels, and much more. There's one of the covers. The theme of the exhibition is that slaves were silenced, their narratives lost. The fabrics of Carrington Wilson's books connect trade, money, and what she calls the threadbare body. The wealth of the traders was based on the bodies of the slaves. As the artist explains in the brochure of the exhibition, I'm sorry, I have 3 vessels, this is a quote, the body, the book, and the ship form an intimate connection in the works of Book of the Bound. My work attempts to enter into mysteries binding bodies of flesh to the bodies of land, water, and text that forged and formed the social fabric of our hunger-haunted history, close quote. Her collage covers become a song to those who could not fill these books with their stories. In some cases, the books are open in a series of pages, accordion pleated, standing, or other formats. Each book has a poetic title and often also a poem. We see references to those silent slaves who could have been in these pages. Because European slavers often traded fine fabrics like silk and velvet in exchange for bodies, Wilson believes the stories of their bodies remain in the cloth. She adds another layer as well. Merchants could not have sailed ships to Africa without canvas sails. Carrington Wilson also includes stacks of books whose titles create found poetry. We are invited to do the same thing. This seemingly serendipitous project is revealing the opportunity for us to create found poetry that points toward issues of the slave trade is empowering. So that's the first show. 2012, I wrote that. Second show is Letter to a Laundress, 2018. Carletta Carrington Wilson addresses her letter to a laundress to her great-great-grandmother, but her profound photo poem installation, currently on view at the Kittredge Gallery in Tacoma, honors the work of all those who, in her words, took in wash. She found photographs of anonymous laundresses in the archives of the Farm Security Administration, most of them taken in the late 1930s by such well-known photographers as Dorothea Lange, Marion Post Wolcott, and Russell Lee. The letter is a poem written in blue script on the photographs. It is recited by the artist in a podcast as we view the work, and you can access that podcast online, I discovered. Mounted on fabric, the photographs are pegged to a line and hang above our heads. As we walk between three lines of closely packed laundry, the poem unwinds, describing the many steps of doing laundry before the advent of machines and drip-dry fabric. Carletta has identified 10 steps with a single word: wash, soak, starch, wring, boil, pin, rub, scrub, hang, press. Starch. Hang. The photographs are arresting, suggesting the real labor of doing laundry and how it evolved. Some of the photographs are actually from the late 19th century of early washerwomen stirring laundry in a tub with a washing stick. Others have a washboard, that iconic object now seen only as a relic. There are several in this exhibition. The women rarely look up or out, never at the camera. We have all types of women, from those dressed in a muslin shift to those, well, I did show one with heels. Let's see. There. Is that this one? No. I guess I forgot to put it in. So let's go back. The women, okay, I read that. To those in suits and shoes with heels. Carletta Carlington Wilson deeply feels words, their meanings, double meanings, and symbolism. Thus here, as offered by the artist, is a shift from laundry to something more sinister. Hoist baskets, tote tubs, lug those loads. Every bundle extends a line awaiting its hangings. And suddenly, as Wilson wrote the poem, she realized the double meaning of hanging as also lynching. As the artist said in the lecture, the lines of the poem lead the reader away from the mundane duty of washing clothes to a disturbing image of lynching. Thus we are led into the awful reality that links these women beyond the ordinary task of laundry. Quote, post-emancipation in the late 19th and early 20th century, there was a rise in the number of lynchings in the South. These mothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, cousins, and friends knew, were related to, heard of, witnessed, and buried someone who had been lynched. They also washed the clothes of someone who participated in a lynching. I was just speculating, this is Carletta speaking, but this was confirmed by a woman who spoke to me after one of my artist talks, close quote. This exhibition includes other intense works as well. Across one wall is a series of fabric works called Field Notes from 2014, with Carletta's trademark layers and meanings hidden in their patterns and textures. You can spend a long time exploring these works, which are, as the artist suggests, like landscapes. One of her themes is the text of textiles, the steps from cotton into cloth, and the metaphors that emerge from fabric. Then there are simple cutout house shapes, what the artist calls wordless books, in a series called Not My Name, that's not with a K also, Haint My House. They refer to the fact that 90% of enslaved people were illiterate. The blue around the doors, called Haint Blue, was intended to deter ghosts. On one wall, a knotted line again has double meaning. The names are not names. The names here are written across the narrow strip at the top. Not names, but the names given by slave masters, here taken from a plantation inventory. The artist elaborated, quote, the idea is that once a person becomes enslaved, their lines of descent are knotted. Each time a person is sold, with each name change and change of place of bondage, the loss of knowledge of familiar ties becomes increasingly knotted and unknown, close quote. The artist describes, there she is again, the work To Resist Dying as referring to both the resist die process and that of a man and woman resisting their enslavement. Underneath is a blood knot, a tangled pile on the floor, invoking the intermixing, knotting of blood among people involved in the slave trade. The artist specified that blood knot represents the knotted bloodlines of Africans, Europeans, Asians, and Indians as a result of global trade networks formed during the transatlantic slave trade. Carletta Carrington Wilson, poet, collagist, historian, one of the most intriguing creative minds I have known. Here is hoping this exhibition can move to a major museum soon. That's 2018. And there's that incredible pile of knotted yarn that looks like blood. Okay, that's Carletta. We're going to have her, right, John? Yeah. Whoa, what was that noise? So, the second artist I'm going to read about may be familiar to you, Buster Simpson. Some of you have definitely heard of Buster Simpson. Buster Simpson, court jester of eco-urban art. Buster Simpson arrived in downtown Seattle in 1973, only 4 years after Lucy Lippard came here to create what is known as the first ever exhibition of conceptual art. The catalog for that exhibition, a stack of index cards, is part of the Seattle Art Museum's permanent collection and on exhibit at the moment in Minimal Art and Its Legacy. Conceptual artists oppose the marketing of art and the separation of art from life. That led them to explore everyday life and to use found materials as art. They also believed in calling attention to the abstract systems and structures of art. Liberated by the open-ended ideas of conceptual art, Simpson, in collaboration with other artists and community activists living in downtown Seattle, began to intervene in the fabric of the city. The work of those early activists transformed thinking in the city. Today we have urban gardens everywhere. We have a variety of trees. We have bus shelters with seats sometimes. All of these were unknown in the Seattle of the early 1970s. Simpson himself has gone from guerrilla street artist to highly respected participant in major projects. Currently, that project is the new waterfront that will emerge. This was written when they were actually drilling. After the viaduct is gone and the tunnel is completed, keep your fingers crossed that we survive that insanely gigantic drill going underneath Pioneer Square at this very moment. I had an office in the Grand Central building, so there it was. Simpson's major retrospective at the Frye Art Museum allows us to see some of the ephemera of his early street work, remakes of some pieces in museum-sized scale, and materials and new work following in the spirit of some of his primary occupations. In 1969, Simpson was in Woodstock, Vermont, familiar date, creating what he calls earthworks projects, actually, as Jen Graves jauntily describes in her article, an improvised farm for people to visit as an alternative to music. But it got overrun by the masses, and he became a security guard and then a janitor cleaning up after everyone. This experience was formative. He is still picking up junk and letting people mess with his art. Simpson moved west to be part of the founding of Pilchuck, then conceived of as an experimental multimedia retreat. He started living in downtown Seattle when it was grimy and gritty, impoverished, unassuming, when poor people, and he was one of them, were part of the fabric of the city in the early 1970s. From his point of view, as a public interventionist, he began to pioneer absurdly simple solutions to the complex issues of urban ecology, or in other words, how people and nature intersect with bureaucracies in a city. He assumed a persona of woodman, picking up cast-off pieces of wood from the street. And there's a video of him loading up with a possible number of pieces of wood, reaching for one more piece, which he repeatedly drops. He works with detritus, recycled industrial materials, found objects, in the spirit of Marcel Duchamp, but approaches them with a sense of compassionate humor and practical purpose, rather than deadpan irony. we can compare it to Lawrence Weiner's Declaration of Intent of 1968, in which he's trying to pick up driftwood. Whoops. I'm sorry. But, where am I? Sorry. But Weiner didn't do anything with it. It was the act itself that was his art. Simpson, there is always another step, a problem to solve. Duchamp took a urinal, some of you may be familiar with this, and put it in an art exhibition. Simpson put a composting commode on the street for use in an area that had no public toilet. Furthermore, the toilet was going to provide fertilizer for an urban tree planted in the same spot. The difference is exact. In the first case, a useful object was declared to be aesthetic and consequently useless. In the second, a basic need was met by creative thinking. Let's see. For Simpson, there has been no giving up, no sense of the futility of working with systems. He even included his videos of meetings in his retrospective, a wonderfully humorous nod to the hours he has spent in them. He has worked inside and outside of systems throughout his career and pioneered with other artists in Seattle the idea of joining a design team for a major project at the beginning of the process rather than as an art add-on at the end. He continues to pursue an idealistic, even utopian practice, but he brings to that problem a sense of poetry, what he calls poetic utility. His work is never only an art object. It is placed within systems that shaped it. Where's that thing going here? Piece of old dirty paper. He was hired at a minimum wage to clear a loft. He created an exhibition, which he called Selective Disposal Project. You can just barely read that there. Out of dirt and rubbish. Again, this is a contrast to Duchamp's dust breeding experiment, in which he allowed dust to accumulate on the large glass for a year, and that became the artwork. Simpson suggested working with youth corps and skilled craftsmen to make a park with rubble from the freeway construction that had been dumped on the waterfront, instead of what he describes as, quote, lots of clean and green. He made a crow's nest out of some rubble in a very old cherry tree about to be bulldozed, sat at it, and then, by referring to the legal rights of trees, called on the city council to declare it in the public domain. Although the Fry exhibition has an emphasis on the remainders of his early work, the artist has created sculptures specifically for the show. Some of these sculptural recreations are pedantic compared with how they were originally conceived. For example, crowbars with electric magnetic beer bottles. Originally, a man knocked beer bottles off a table, and by throwing the beer bottles in an alley, they fell into a recycling bin. Another example of new work is double header finial, a massive piece of gilded anodized aluminum, steel, found parts, and a Boeing nose cone set on a triangular black flag. It provides ample perching for crows. In the original, seen in an old video, we see crows competing for a perch on a flagpole. That was the origin of this piece. Now it is a send-up of the new Seattle, its gilded lifestyle and ornate housing. Why shouldn't the crows join in? The black flag warns of the current risks of urban health. One of Simpson's constant themes, though, has been waterfront and water restoration. He has thrown limestone into polluted river as a way of neutralizing acid, most famously in Hudson River Headwaters Purge from 1990. The exhibition has a retrieved limestone disc from the project, a video of his original action, as well as his partner projecting limestone purge, in which a naked Simpson slings limestones marked with purge at the World Trade Center as a protest against capitalism's destruction of the environment. I wish I had a picture of that. Habitat restoration is also referred to in secured embrace, comprised of what Simpson called a breakwater armor unit, a tetrapod supporting a tree root. The tetrapod becomes a heroic figure trying to prevent erosion, and the piece is a model for a means of stopping erosion and encouraging healthy tidal life. I just want to mention that his contribution to the waterfront is a whole lot of these tetrapods now installed down on near the original landing place on wherever that is down there. Yeah, you can see them. Simpson's tides out tables, come on. You have to point it at the thing. Table set also refers to pollution. It initially looks like a somewhat elegant table with interesting plates. Actually, he placed these unglazed plates into polluted streams and then baked them. So the solid waste became a brown glaze. We are eating off a glaze of our own pollution. This is also an ironic comment taken from native historical perspectives on the rich marine life in the Duwamish, sufficient to amply feed them before white men arrived. In many ways, a museum exhibition of Buster Simpson's work inevitably stretches his principles in the wrong direction, towards objects, towards scale, towards permanence. Museums are not adept at capturing ephemeral conditions, urban detritus, simple solutions to water pollution. The museum could have made a messier show. Simpson did tear out a few pieces of the walls in an effort to counter the formality and impersonality of the spaces, but in the end, Simpson still belongs in the street with cast-off materials. Go to Post Alley, at that time, not now, and see the recreation of his solar clothesline, one of those simple and obvious acts to meet a need: save energy, protest against condominium clothesline restrictions. In every respect, Simpson is hard to capture as an artist. His work transforms before our eyes, from one object to another, from one idea to another. Puns and metaphors are rife. Perhaps that is the main characteristic to take away from this Simpson moment in Seattle. Disarming humor can win a place at the table, and then you can subversively introduce unacceptable ideas, somewhat like a court jester. Of course, Simpson is never really jesting, and today he is regarded as a major figure in ecological art. That's 2013. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Are we out of time?
Are we out of time? Linda, what do you think? Is there any way you could maybe shorten the third artist a little bit?
I can abbreviate and tantalize people.
Okay. That's a good technique.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Let's see how far I can get. Because it's something that you all need to know about, even if I don't read you. See, it's huge. This is a whole talk in itself.
Okay.
But I will start. And I'm going to read from my earlier book. How many of you have heard of Maya Lin? Yay. All right, I'll try to stop me at 5 minutes.
Okay.
In her enormous work of land art along the Columbia River Basin, known as the Confluence Project, Maya Lin creates startling intersections between traditional modernism, ecology, and indigenous perceptions and experiences. Lin, as you all know, emerged at the age of 22 in 1979 with her now famous Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Lin was one starting point for the social and political context of art. She's reflected these principles again in the Civil Rights Memorial of 1989. From the beginning, the Confluence Project was an unusual undertaking for Maya Lin. As part of the 200th anniversary commemoration of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark's 1804-05 Voyage of Discovery, Corps of Discovery expedition, the topic initially did not interest her at all, but she learned that the project was more than laudatory. Indigenous cultural leaders, as well as scientists, politicians, environmentalists, civic activists, all wanted a new interpretation of the Lewis and Clark story. Most striking was the commitment of Anton Minthorn of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. He believed that Lin's sensitive commemorations of the Vietnam War and Civil Rights Movement suggested she could address the Native perspective, that Lewis and Clark brought conquest, greed, illness, and destruction to their tribes and lands. He and another elder, Chief Cliff Snyder, retired member of the Tribal Council of the Chinook Indian Nation, went to New York City to talk to Maya Lin about the ecological changes to the Columbia River since the Corps of Discovery, the huge loss of species, and the current efforts at restoration. The dramatic ecological changes in the Columbia River Basin that Snyder and Minthorn describe coincided with Lin's interest in creating a monument to extinction, which she has subsequently done. As she stated in 1996, we are the one species that has rapidly caused the extinction of so many other species. We have to stop. We have to begin to understand that we cannot continue to overuse. I don't know how it will manifest itself, but this is my dream. Let's see, I'll skip along so you can see some of it. Each of the sites marks intersections of cultures, histories, and ecologies. The river encompasses many different tribes and ecosystems, as well as 25 dams. Okay, so I won't have time to talk much, but let's see. This is the first site, or actually the last stop of Lewis and Clark at Cape Disappointment. Some of you have probably been to this stunning place. And this shows you can hardly see anything from the slide, but you see two paths, and that's the important point. Okay. At the beginning, after the initial introduction to the project by Native elders, Maya Lin changed the design of the first Confluence project to be dedicated at Cape Disappointment because she was so affected by the beauty of the Native dedication prayer. She spontaneously asked permission to include it at the site. As a result, there are two walkways at Cape Disappointment. The concrete planks of the walkway to the Pacific Ocean are incised with the summary statement of the notes of Lewis and Clark. It includes measurements and distances between rivers, creeks, houses, villages, tribes, what they called remarkable places. A short way inland is a second path, marks the water's edge 200 years ago, before jetties called sand deposit were built at the mouth of the Columbia River. Maya Lin incised these planks with the text of the Chinook blessing ceremony. The path, it's an oyster path, by the way. The path leads to a circle that is irregularly marked by driftwood anchored upright. They mark the Native American cardinal directions: inside, outside, up, down, and through. This thing is feeble. This is some of the Native prayer that you can read. It's very beautiful. Teach us and show us the way, at the bottom, is the phrase that they repeat after every group of statements. Lin lays out these two walkways to highlight the contrast of indigenous and European perspectives for perceiving the natural world by juxtaposing the Chinook prayer and Lewis and Clark journal entries. The first is poetic and reverential, evoking an expansive vision that encompasses all aspects of life. The second is factual, Lewis and Clark, enumerative, measured, and scientific. Our relation to those planks is quite different from our relationship to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, which also contains words on a hard surface. In the Veterans Memorial, the surfaces are vertical. We approach closely. We even physically touch the polished marble, the name of a specific person. We see our own reflection. We feel sadness. We are part of the story. On the walkways at Cape Disappointment, the brilliant sun and outdoor setting are part of the story. We stand on top of the story. We stoop to read it more closely. We are as much a part of these stories as we are part of the Vietnam Memorial. Lewis and Clark's journals mark what they saw then. The Chinook prayer marks their reverence for the past, the earth, all living creatures, and they ask them to teach us and show us the way. What we see is very different. All of these layers resonate with hard concrete planks set in an inevitable progression, but the sand softens them. The sun beats down. I'm going to stop. There's the native prayer, another piece of it there. The sun beats down, the woods beckon. Oops, I don't have time for that. Yeah, shall I go ahead? I bet you're, yes? Okay. Thanks, Henry. But I will quickly mention that when Henry and I went back there several years later, the Native American prayer was still readable, and the Lewis and Clark statements were getting all rubbed out accidentally. Interesting.
Can you read the Native American prayer?
This is part of it, yeah.
Can you read it now?
Yes, you want me to read it? I can't see it. You'll have to read it.
Oh.
I'll have to change my.
We'll see it.
You can read it.
Yeah.
In those same headwaters for years before Lewis and Clark, the Chinook Indian Nation and its many related tribes grew wealthy as pivotal traders between the inland tribes and boats from all parts of the world. The Chinook called Cape Disappointment Kais. They hope to achieve tribal recognition as a result of their connection to the Confluence Project, but so far those hopes have not materialized. They had a mixed response at the dedication. Some members of the community, as you see on the left, dressed in regalia and were dancing, singing, drumming, making speeches, and cutting ribbons. Others protested with signs that read, Kais, not Cape D. Can artists be a prostitute for U.S. colonialism? Myelin, why do you immortalize U.S. theft? So that was quite a split. I'm not going to talk about the rest of it, but I had to show you these pictures because Myelin had these little girls there. This is called the fish cutting bench. I'll tell you about it another time. This is one of the dedications with Maya and her daughters. You recognize him on the left, folks? Gary Locke, former governor, and on the right is Cliff Snyder, one of the Native leaders. And okay, that's that. I will stop. He said this made it blank. But
Susan, you have got to book yourself again and again and again. Both Bob and Susan need to come back. What an afternoon this was.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, so much.
Thank you.